Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. Blessings, good evening to you all. As I was saying earlier, we've just ended the annual range retreat, 3 months range retreat, which Buddhist monastics all over the world will do. I guess a retreat is something you do. Stay in one place, more or less, for 3 months, and usually it's a time where we do a lot of meditation, sometimes together as a community, sometimes on our own in solitary retreat. And the lay community often join in, coming to the monastery regularly, joining in meditation sessions, listening to the Dhamma, making offerings, particularly of food, to support the Sangha. And often people make particular vows or resolutions to meditate every day for 3 months, or keep 5 precepts or 8 precepts for 3 months, and so on. So it's usually quite a good time for people's practice, both Sangha and laity. Not always easy, because as soon as you start making rules for yourself or resolutions and so on, part of your mind probably resists, as it likes to not have to follow rules, not have to be disciplined. But anyone who's practiced meditation will know, well, discipline is part of training the mind. You have to do certain things, and that you don't always want to do them. Just meditation itself, sitting still, or walking meditation for a period of time, you'll notice sometimes you want to do it, but sometimes you don't want to do it. So any kind of resolution or determination to do a certain practice will bring up different moods and reactions, and you'll see that through a period of time, like a retreat. But that's hopefully something you can learn from and see the value of continuous practice, putting forth effort in a determined way and in a continuous way. It's something Ajahn Chah, our teacher, praised and encouraged, is steady practice or continuous practice. He said is the best practice. People ask him, what is the best meditation practice to do? What is the best practice to do in Buddhism? He'd say steady practice or continuous practice. Because our minds are not that steady or firm, we often get scattered, distracted, confused. We become prey to different mental states and emotions. Sometimes we feel enthusiastic, sometimes lazy, and so on. It's actually one of the hardest things to achieve in practice, is just a continuity or steadiness of practice. And Ajahn Chah was always saying, you do your retreat and put all this effort in, and then after the retreat you let everything go. The wrong kind of letting go. You just give up and stop keeping the precepts, stop meditating, do other things, travel, socialize, work, and everything sort of falls apart. It's quite a common experience. So even though it is the end of the 3 months range retreat, and it's a sort of time where Buddhists often have festivals, celebrations, have katinas and ceremonies like that, and go to visit different monasteries and teachers, one shouldn't drop the practice. Try to keep your practice going. Today at our monastery we had a good karma day, where people came to do work to clean up the monastery after the retreat and ready for our katina ceremony in a couple of weeks. And they did gardening chores and cleaning chores that we do every year, nothing special or unusual. But one person noticed that today it was very easy to do, partly because there was a lot of people, and many hands make light work, but partly because we do these jobs every year regularly, so people learn. They learn what they have to do, and they try to keep the garden beds clean, free from weeds, and so perhaps a few less weeds grow each year. Certain things aren't as dirty as they used to be because they're cleaned regularly, and so on. It's very much the same with your mind and the practice of meditation or any aspect of Buddhism. When you practice regularly, steadily, continuously, one of the benefits is often it gets easier because you know how to do it and you've done it before. You're cleaning a room, say, for example, in your home. If you clean your room regularly, then even if sometimes it gets dirty or you pile a lot of stuff in there or someone comes in with muddy shoes or something, it's not too difficult to get back to that state of cleanliness because it's already clean generally, and a few extra bits of dirt or rubbish doesn't take much to clean up. But if you neglect your room for months or years and it ends up full of stuff and full of dust and cobwebs, it might take a long time to clean up. So our mind is a bit like that. If you practice meditation regularly, you may not always be particularly peaceful or mindful all the time, but certainly there'll be certain qualities that you're developing and keeping in mind. They won't be far away. You'll know how to develop effort, bring up kindness, compassion, bring up the mindfulness. It won't be so hard if you're doing some every day. Of course, our aim is to ultimately completely clean up our room or the room of our mind, keep it completely free from dust and cobwebs, if you might say it that way, meaning the mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, delusion, or we say craving and attachments. Your aim is one day to completely free your mind from all of these, complete liberation of mind, or complete freedom of mind. When we think of the Buddha, our teacher, say when you bow to a Buddha statue or you meditate recollecting the Buddha perhaps, you generally think of the three qualities, leading qualities of a Buddha. That is the great wisdom of the Buddha, because the Buddha has learned how to purify his mind from defilement and understands the way to do that and understands how to teach that to others. And the Buddha has great compassion. He became a Buddha because he had great compassion for other beings, wanted to help them free themselves from suffering. But first he had to do it for himself. But the third quality after the wisdom and the compassion is purity of mind. This one is something that people are often a bit shy to think of or talk about because it seems like to be so high and remote. Purity of mind. Sometimes even in our modern society, somebody who you say is pure, you're even you're suspicious of, or you try to find fault with them because the idea of purity is maybe not so popular nowadays. But it's just a statement of fact. The Buddha's mind is pure, meaning it's free from mental defilement. And mental defilements cannot re-emerge or regrow or return to that mind. It's completely pure. That purity of mind, freedom from greed, anger, delusion, obviously is something very special. It's not totally unique to the Buddha because anyone else who practices the Buddhist path has the chance to also experience that. But they have to complete the course. that purity of mind, the freedom from greed, anger and delusion, comes about through causes and conditions. It's just the way it is. If you cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, develop insight into the Four Noble Truths, you will purify your mind from the process by which suffering arises, meaning the process by which greed, anger and delusion take over your mind and cause you suffering. It's just a part of nature, you could say, cause and effect. One who cultivates the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, completely, thoroughly, or properly, you might say, will purify their mind of greed, anger and delusion. One who doesn't complete this path or develop this path completely will not have completely purified their mind of greed, anger and delusion. Sometimes the Buddha would talk about that. So he'd say this process of purification or abandoning mental defilements, attachments, generally it's a step-by-step process. It's a gradual process. Can go very fast for some practitioners, but still it tends to be a step-by-step process. First you abandon one set of defilements, the coarser ones, the more obvious ones. Later you abandon the more subtle ones, the less obvious ones. Eventually they're all gone. That's the full stage of full awakening, we say Arahant, Nibbana, or a Buddha or an Arahant would experience that. But it's a process of cause and effect. It's not something that, some people have it, some don't. It's not something that you just get from a special being. The Buddha favors you, so the Buddha gives you Nibbana, as it were. The Buddha simply explained what he had done in his practice and encouraged us to do it, because he said you can do it, human beings can do this, but you have to follow the teachings, the practice, and do it for yourself, but the result will be the same. Purity of mind, freedom from greed, anger and delusion. Another way he referred to the purity of mind is it's the highest happiness. And probably anyone in this world would agree, they want to be happy. We all want to be happy, we say it all the time, I want to be happy, or I am happy, but the Buddha made a clear distinction. There's the more normal kind of happiness, what we sometimes call worldly happiness or material happiness, and then the happiness of the Dhamma and Nibbana, and they're different. The happiness of the Buddha and the Arahants is permanent, because it's based on this purification of mind, freedom from greed, anger and delusion. It's permanent, it's complete, it's not mixed with suffering. Whereas the happiness of the ordinary person is mixed with suffering. It's just we don't admit it or we don't realize it when we say, oh, I'm happy. All of us probably have said at some point in our life, I am happy today, I'm happy. If you're a monk, I'm a happy monk. If you're a mother, you're a happy mother. You're a father, happy father. You're a child, I'm a happy child. Whatever you identify with, you might say, I'm a happy person today, for whatever reason. But that happiness, because it's the more ordinary kind of happiness, unfortunately it doesn't last, does it? That's the main reason that suffering is mixed in with ordinary worldly happiness. It doesn't last, it's temporary. And you notice that as you practice meditation. Just now I was talking about the watching over the sense doorways. Because when we are happy, it will be stimulated by something. You'll see something you like, or taste something you like, hear something you like. You get what you want for a while. Or even just thinking about things that you like makes you feel good, feel happy. That's also a process of cause and result. We might say, I'm happy, or I'm happy because this person did what I wanted, or whatever, but actually it's just a process of cause and result. In one way or other, your senses have been satisfied. And for a while you feel happy, you feel good. But what the Buddha pointed out is, it doesn't last. It's temporary. And sometimes very temporary. A lot of the kind of pleasures we have in life are sort of gone before you know it. And that's part of the suffering, isn't it? Oh, I was feeling so good and it's gone. One moment they say something nice to you, and the next moment they say something very rude or unkind. One moment you taste some nice food, the next you taste something you don't like, and so on. It can be very fast, very quick to change. But even when the happiness is slow to change, it sort of fades out slowly. It does fade out, and that's the important part. So normal happiness, material happiness, what we call in Buddhism kama sukha, sensual happiness, doesn't last. And that's the problem. It's mixed up with suffering, the suffering of impermanence, or because things change. Those experiences of pleasure change. They fade out. They decline, you might say. They're suffering, and they cause suffering, because then you have to go and find more. Get it back, or you try and cling on to it and get every last bit out of it. As Ajahn Chah once, or quite often I believe, taught to the monks about sensual happiness, pleasures, sense pleasures that we're always seeking. He said, no different from a dog with an old bone. If you've ever seen a dog with an old bone, meaning a bone that is just very old, bleached by the sun, there's no taste left in it. It's just dry, brittle, tasteless. But because the dog identifies with the bone as food, and probably remembers a previous bone that had a bit of meat or juice on it and ate it or chewed on it and was happy, he finds this brittle bone and he just sticks to it, chews it, hoping to get just one last little bit of happiness, pleasure out of this bone. Even though there's nothing to be had, it's finished, it's worthless even to a dog, but he'll still hang on to it. Ajahn Chah used to say that's us with sense pleasures. You're just always trying to get the last little bit of juice out of everything. Whatever it may be, even a thought, a fantasy, a dream of something pleasurable, or material things as well. You see sometimes people when they have food that they enjoy, they lick the plate. They want to get every last bit of the juice. Or it's kids with an ice cream or ice lolly, and a lolly on a stick, and they lick the stick to get even the last bit of taste. Or whatever it is, you can imagine in so many areas of life where you're trying to get the last bit of pleasure or happiness out of that thing, because you know it will fade. It doesn't last. And you're forever stuck chasing more pleasure, trying to hold on to it and then trying to get it back, get more. So we quite often say in this world, the modern world, with all its pleasures, there's plenty on offer, that we tend to associate the best kind of pleasure, or the person who has access to the best kind of pleasure, or the most pleasure, is someone with a lot of money. Because the more money you have, the more ice creams or ice lollies you could buy, or literally the more bones you could suck on to get juice out of, if that's how you describe any kind of worldly pleasure. With money, you've got a few more options. You can do more, get more. So if you had enough money, you could sit there licking your bone all through your life. You'd never have to be free from bones. You'd probably get the best quality bones if you wanted, and just chew on them year after year if you wanted to, or any other kind of pleasure that you wanted. You could buy it, have it for your whole life. But that's on the surface. What would it be doing to your mind? Well, even if you were rich enough to buy all the kind of pleasures that you like and have them there ready for you whenever you want, you're still stuck with this "it doesn't last" problem. It doesn't last. And you eat one ice cream, well, you have to go and get another one. Even the richest person in the world still has to go to the fridge to find another ice cream. Or maybe they have to look at their investments and their stocks and shares just to make sure they've still got enough money left in the bank to buy more ice cream, or whatever it is. But you know what I mean. It's in the end, money won't do it. It doesn't buy you happiness. It doesn't buy you love either, as the song says. You can't buy material happiness. Even when you get the things you want, they don't last. That's the nature of worldly material happiness. And there's a lot of competition for it, so you're always forever subject to fear and worry about the competition. So even if you made a lot of money and you have all this kind of property and wealth in all its forms, you still got the worry that someone else will pinch it from you if you're not careful. So you have to be on your guard. Can't rest, can't be at ease. If you did spend all your time eating ice creams or sucking on your bone, maybe someone else will creep up and steal all your money. So you have fear that you'll lose everything. That's the trouble with the world. There's competition. The number of people in the world is always going up. The number of resources in the world is limited. So you couldn't compare worldly happiness with the happiness of a Buddha, say, or an Arahant, a fully awakened being who has no more craving attachment, doesn't need ice cream or bones or money to be happy. There's no comparison. Which is why we say the happiness of Dhamma, the happiness of the awakened mind is better. It's independent of material things. Ultimately, it's independent of the six senses. Instead of always seeking more pleasure through the sense doors, more objects to have, more experiences to have, the mind that is well trained and well developed sees things in perspective. So the mind knows, material pleasure is only just that much because it doesn't last. And little by little, hopefully, the practitioner starts to open up to the truth and let go of some of the craving and attachment that forms around all this pleasure-seeking of the world. So then it doesn't matter quite so much. Contentment comes up, and then understanding comes from the peaceful mind. Understanding that, those things that I used to crave, they're temporary. They don't last. Ultimately, this purity of mind comes through the development of right view and then insight into the Four Noble Truths, understanding that anything that you crave will be a cause for suffering. Even if you get it, you're still not out of it yet. You haven't escaped yet. Because suffering is cyclical, again, it's cause and effect. Just as the awakened mind, Nibbana, has its causes, the suffering mind has its causes. And suffering has to be abandoned. The causes have to be abandoned. What are the causes? Well, the Buddha identified ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, ignorance of the Dhamma. When there's ignorance, craving arises, mainly sensual craving, kama tanha, or the objects of the senses, but also bhava tanha, just craving for life and to get things, to be things. And then vipawa tanha, craving not to be, not to get certain things or certain experiences. We fall into that as well. But suffering has its causes. The awakened mind, free from suffering, has its causes. So the Buddha encouraging a wise person, a discerning person, to always go back and look at what are the causes. If I'm suffering, there must be reasons for this. What we tend to do on retreat, like as I was saying, we've passed through this 3-month retreat, and in the monasteries and occasionally at home as well, people do a lot of meditation, and some people do retreats or longer periods of retreat. One thing you'll notice on retreat is that if you are on your own a lot of the time, or all the time, your mind is still not quiet, isn't it? You know, if you're on your own, there's no one to argue with except for yourself. But you still have memories of previous arguments or things you're not happy about in yourself or in someone else or in the world. That can come up and bother you. So sometimes when you're on retreat, solitary retreat, you have to stop and say, hold on, you know, there's no one here to blame. It's me. It's one of the benefits of solitary retreat. Sometimes you see yourself, or what you take to be yourself, a little bit more deeply. So the technical word, the Pali word, is whha. You're seeing some of these habits of mind you may have got into. They become exposed, because a lot of the time, because there's a handy scapegoat around, we don't see the whha behind our negative state of mind, the fault-finding mind, irritation, anger. We tend to go more to the object of our fault-finding mind, or the whha. So we're going to, oh, it's that person who makes me angry, or it's this situation that I don't like and makes me feel uncomfortable, unhappy, or it's my painful leg that makes me unhappy. You know, there's always something that makes us angry or puts us into a state of whha. But when you're on your own, you also can see, well, half of this whha is just habit, bad habit. And there's less and less for you to blame if you're on your own. You can still blame things, of course. You can blame yourself, past actions, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And so often people on retreat find they've got a lot of guilt or self-aversion coming up. Some people will still blame other people even though they're on their own. And they say, oh, all my suffering in my life has come from that person, you know, my partner, my friend, my teacher, my work colleague. You know, there'll be someone, even though they're not actually with you, but just the memory of them can become the source of your aversion, and you say, I blame this person, and you're just carrying them around in your head. They're not even with you. Retreats are like that. Often you start to see some of your mental habits, and you realize, I should start letting go of this, because there's no one to blame ultimately. What can you do if you're in the forest here in the monastery and you're on retreat? Say you're 2 weeks. Often we do these 2-week solitary retreats, not talking to anyone, not being with anyone. You know, sometimes you get to the point where you don't know who you can blame. You've run out of scapegoats. You can't blame yourself or anyone else. You're just at your hut. So maybe you just blame your hut. It happens. You know, you hear monks sort of getting upset with the building they live in, the room they live in, because our huts are very small. So I've lived with a monk before, and he used to get angry with his hut because he didn't know what else to get angry with. This is what he said. He said, I just don't know who to get angry with, so I'm angry with my hut. And he would bang the wall of his hut every day a couple of times. And I was living in the next hut, maybe 50 to 100 meters away, and I could hear him banging his hut a few times when he got angry. And I asked him, I said, why do you bang your hut? He said, I'm just so angry, but I don't know who to take it out on, so I'm taking it out on my hut, the wall of my hut. Sometimes we do that, don't we? We take our anger out on a material thing. So if you're driving, or you drive too fast or carelessly, if you're working or doing something, maybe you make a mistake, or you deliberately hit your hand down on something or break something because you're angry. Sometimes we take it out on an inanimate object. The root cause of it is vibhava, not happy with something. It could just be a memory. So when you're on retreat, you see that. You say, oh, I've got all these habits. I keep remembering things that annoy me, blaming somebody, getting angry. But if you can bring your mind back to stillness, maybe you start to see, this is vibhava. It's not really a person. It's more like a habit of mind coming ultimately from ignorance. So it's the very opposite of the Buddha or the Arahants who have cleared their mind of ignorance. It's the very opposite. Your mind is going back to states of delusion, craving, attachment, and of course suffering because of it. So the Buddha encouraged us to reflect, develop some right view, right understanding, develop more mindfulness, more steadiness of mind, more samadhi, and then really try to let it go. Let that whha or the karma danha or the bhava danha, whichever way danha is manifesting, let it go once you've seen it. Once the mindfulness comes up, maybe you can see this danha, instead of blaming it or seeing it as a person, as you or somebody else, you realize it's more like a mental habit that clouds the mind, brings you suffering. But because it isn't a person, you don't really need to get upset with anyone, but you need to recognize what it is and then let it go. If whha gets really strong, then we hurt ourselves sometimes. Sometimes we hurt other people, of course. Sometimes we damage the wall of our building. Sometimes we hurt ourselves. Sometimes we're trying to hurt someone else, but we hurt ourselves in the process. Very rarely will you see monks getting so angry that they would try to physically hurt each other, but occasionally it happens. I've been a monk 40 years, I think. Once or twice I've seen anger in monks where they wanted to, say, throw a punch. It happened once when two monks had an argument, this many years ago in Thailand. Two monks had an argument, and one monk was so angry, he was a bit older than the other one. The younger monk was a typical young person, kind of would tease the older person. Not a very good habit. As a monk you learn not to do that, but he hadn't learned this one yet, so he was still doing it. So he teased the older monk, and the older monk didn't like it. So one day the older monk, having previously told off or warned the younger monk not to do it, and the younger monk wasn't listening, he lost his temper and he threw a punch at the younger monk, which he shouldn't have done, but he did. The thing is, the younger monk was young, so he easily dodged the punch. And because the older monk was old and a bit unsteady on his feet, he threw a punch. It didn't land on the younger monk, and then he fell over, which unfortunately made everyone around laugh, because they thought, he shouldn't be doing that in the first place, and he made a fool of himself throwing his punch. So he hurt himself. But looking back at what happened, there was anger coming up. Obviously there was somebody provoking him, so the other monk had a role to play in that, not very good either. But the first monk, or the older monk, he should have been perhaps more restrained. He wasn't. And he ended up hurting himself because he gave in to his anger. And we do that all the time. Kind of regularly people tell me, when they have an argument, usually it's husband and wife, or boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever. They have an argument and one person gets so angry that they do something which hurts themselves. It's quite common, isn't it? When we're so angry, we end up making a mistake, hurting ourselves. Quite common, we break, damage the car we're driving if we're driving. The worst case was a couple were arguing, they got so angry, one person just drove their car into another car. And after they calmed down, reflected on it, they realized, this anger made me drive too fast and crash into this other car. That's whha. That's what it makes us do. Even if you're on a retreat on your own with no one around, the same sort of dynamics going on. You may not physically do anything, but in your mind you may be doing the same sort of things. Often we have little scenarios in our mind where we have an argument with someone, maybe there's someone we don't like, and we're blaming them, we're thinking of them, so you have this little scene like from a movie going on in your mind. They say this and I say that, and then I say this and they say that, and in the end your argument leads to a fight or something, and you throw a punch. Maybe even in your mind you fall over as well. It could happen, couldn't it? Because anything can happen in a dream or in a fantasy that you create in your mind. It can go the other way, just as with sensual desire, or material craving, we create nice things in our mind. The nicest ice cream I could imagine, the nicest place to visit, the nicest person to fall in love with. So it can go both ways, love and hate. But what is it? It's craving causing your mind to create a fantasy, a story. And when you're on your own, sort of sitting, walking, or just spending time on your own, maybe you can see that. You realize when you lose your mindfulness, then you become prey to craving. It's like craving is just waiting to take over your mind. This is why the Buddha said, be on your guard. When you have sights come into your eyes, sounds to your ears, taste, smell, touch, or thoughts and ideas coming into your mind, you have to be on your guard, because these doorways need to be guarded. Otherwise you fall into craving, tanha, for or against, liking or disliking. And it's your own mental proliferation. Maybe nobody else is there. You're on your own in your room or your place in the forest or quiet place. Nobody else is there, and you cause yourself all kinds of suffering when craving takes over. So that may be one of the values of retreats. You can see that taking place, and there's no one to blame. So you have to take responsibility for your own mind. And that's a big step in meditation, where you realize the problem is a lack of mindfulness, a lack of wisdom and insight. Even though other people in the world around is involved, I can't really pin all the blame on them. I have to come back and look at my own mind. That's the real source of the problem, because craving comes up in your own mind. Craving isn't out there in the world somewhere, it's in yourself. So with the things we like and want, just contemplating impermanence helps us understand better. Sure, there are many pleasures to have in the world, many nice things to have, but none of them last. And that's the difference between us and the awakened ones, the noble ones. We still go running after temporary pleasures, thinking that will do. Still going back to our dog bone, hoping to get a bit more juice out of it. When we don't get what we want, then the mind goes to aversion. You want them to give you that thing and they don't. You want this thing to happen the way you want and it doesn't. You want to feel good and you don't. You want to be healthy, happy, successful, all the kind of worldly kinds of happiness. We're always looking for them to solve our problems, keep us happy, and we may get some of it, but then it fades, disappears. It's not permanent. But when you see the impermanence, well, you may still enjoy pleasures, but you know they won't last, so you don't stress about it. You don't suffer with the impermanence once you see it, once you know it. The stronger the craving, the stronger the kind of sensual desire, the harder it is to see it, isn't it? There are some kinds of desires very difficult to recognize the impermanence. That's why the Buddha kept reminding us, just reflect on the impermanence of life every day. You get older every day. With old age or aging, you get sickness. One day you've got to die. One day everybody else you know will have to die. One day you will have to separate from everyone you love and like. Whoever, wherever, it will happen. Sometimes they die before us, sometimes we die before them, but it will happen. Birth and death come together. That's what Ajahn Chah used to say. Nobody likes to see that birth and death come together. They only focus on the birth, the getting of what you want. New baby, everyone loves a new baby. Everyone likes the beginning of a new meal. Order the food you like. You don't go to the food stall, but order the meal or the food you like, and at the same time think, oh, this won't last. In 10 minutes this will be gone. If you thought like that, you probably wouldn't even buy it, would you? Nobody does that. They're only thinking of what they're about to get, what's about to happen. But everything is impermanent, so you get the beginning of the meal and the end of the meal at the same time, because that's part of the reality of taste and sense. The sense pleasure of food doesn't last. Birth comes with death. Beginning comes with end. Anything that arises must cease. It's just nature. It's not like anyone is doing that to us. It's not like anyone makes your meal end. You might blame someone if you were eating a nice meal and they force you to stop eating to go and do something else. You could, but it doesn't matter if anyone would force you to stop eating your meal or not. Your meal will end anyway. That's life, isn't it? Nothing lasts. There's a beginning and there's an end of everything. The mind that sees that, recognizes that, is the mind of the noble ones. Then they don't suffer. Then we don't suffer if we see it. The reason we suffer is because we don't see the impermanence of all these sense objects and pleasures and experiences we seek, and so we get upset, get annoyed, disappointed. We go to whha again. You had it, what you wanted, and then you lost it. So, and you feel depressed or sad. If you can bring your mind to stillness, mindfulness, awareness, maybe you see this cycle going on almost daily and many times a day. Happy, sad, happy, sad, happy, sad, over and over again, and the mind starts to learn, then it doesn't get lost in the pleasure seeking quite so much, because it doesn't last. It's just that much. Doesn't last. So at this time of year, particularly for the Buddhist community, it's a time we go off making merit to different temples and monasteries. Some people travel overseas to make merit. Some people go to their local temples and monasteries. Some people go a bit further. We do all that, and that's good. Make some merit, we say. Meet Dhamma friends, listen to talks, make offerings, but don't forget your practice, because our mind is still prey to these kilesas, the craving, the attachment. It's still there. So we still have to keep up our regular Dhamma practice. Steady practice is the best practice. Continuous practice is the best practice. So I'll leave you with those reflections tonight, and after this, if anyone has any questions, can answer them.